My name is Ava Harris. I'm 27, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I had my life under control. I had a steady job at a marketing firm, a boyfriend I'd been with for 3 years, and a carefully curated routine that made me feel like I was finally adulting properly. I liked my apartment, my plants, my late night takeout rituals. I liked feeling like I was building something solid, until everything collapsed in a single phone call. It was a Thursday morning when HR called me into the office. The words hung in the air, almost surreal. Company restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. I sat there, staring at the polite faces around me, feeling like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. My career, my stability, my carefully drawn future, all gone. I immediately thought of George. He had been my rock, or so I had believed, for the past 3 years. I needed him now, just a fraction of the support I thought we promised each other. I dialed his number, my fingers trembling. Ava? His voice sounded casual, almost too casual for the gravity I felt. I got laid off today, I said, my words barely steady. A pause. Then, in the tone of someone reading a grocery list, he said, "So, what does this mean for rent? You can still cover your half, right?" I blinked, processing. "George, I just lost my job. I'm not thinking about—" "That's exactly why we need to talk," he interrupted. "Look, Ava, I can't do this if we're not both on the same level. I can't date someone who isn't financially stable." The words hit harder than I expected. My chest tightened. Betrayal stung more than fear. 3 years, 3 shared apartments, birthdays, late-night cries, dreams, gone over a single number on a paycheck. Later that evening, I found myself at his apartment, standing in his pristine living room, the one he had insisted we decorate together. He was wearing the kind of casual designer he knew would intimidate me, looking like he had rehearsed this moment for weeks. I sat on the couch, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ava, I need someone who matches my ambition," he said, softening his tone, like that would make it less cruel. "You're great, really, but this isn't going to work." I laughed. At first it was nervous, then bitter. You're breaking up with me over a layoff that happened today?" "Level up or I'm gone," he said, like it was a life lesson rather than a breakup. He even mimicked the nail polish emoji, gesturing with his hands. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced. All the nights I stayed late at work, the weekends I spent learning new skills, all the sacrifices, meaningless in his eyes because I wasn't rich enough right now. "Unless you can guarantee you'll have a better job within a week," he added, smirking like this was a joke. I stood up, my chest burned, tears threatening, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Then, "Bye, George. I'm done." He blinked, stuttered. You're just giving up?" "Yes, you said it yourself. Level up or you're gone. So, bye." I left before he could respond, the echo of the closing door sounding like the final punctuation of our relationship. Walking home, rain soaked my coat and my hair, but I didn't care. I kept thinking about every subtle red flag I had ignored over the past 3 years. The late-night texts about money, the snide comments about my ambition, the way he always compared me to his friends' girlfriends. I didn't notice the small cream-colored envelope tucked in my tote bag. It was from my grandmother, who had passed 3 months ago. I hadn't opened it yet. Busy morning, busy surviving. But a small part of me felt an inexplicable tug toward it, a whisper of fate in the midst of betrayal. For the first time in my adult life, I felt raw, exposed, and completely untethered. But somewhere under that hurt, there was a spark, a tiny defiant spark that whispered, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." The envelope from my grandmother had been sitting on my kitchen counter for days, like a quiet observer of my heartbreak. I finally opened it that evening, alone in my apartment, the city lights bleeding through the curtains. Inside was a letter, in her familiar looping handwriting, and a small legal document. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I want you to know that I've always believed in you, even when the world doesn't. Enclosed is the settlement of my estate. Use it wisely, but remember, your value isn't measured in money. It's measured in courage and heart. Love always, Grandma." And then I saw the numbers. My grandmother had left me her apartment and a significant sum in savings, enough to change everything. Not extravagantly, but enough to give me options. to give me freedom, to remind me that I didn't need anyone like George to validate my worth. For a long moment, I just stared, letting the reality sink in. I was still heartbroken, still unemployed, but now I was free. Free to breathe without the weight of someone else's judgment. I spent the next days exploring the apartment she'd left me. It was modest, but it had character. Wide windows that caught the morning light perfectly, a small balcony that overlooked the park, hardwood floors that creaked under my steps in all the right ways. I imagined myself there, making it mine, putting down roots without fear of someone else dictating my life. And I did. I took a portion of the inheritance and put a deposit on a penthouse downtown. Not flashy, but elegant, smart, and entirely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a doorman, sleek minimalism that reflected my taste, not someone else's. I walked through the empty rooms with a quiet pride, imagining the life I was about to reclaim. That night, I posted one photo to Instagram, the view from the living room, the sunset painting the skyline in oranges and purples. Caption, new chapter. Nothing more, nothing less. It wasn't a statement, not really. It was a whisper to myself. I am not powerless. Within minutes, notifications began to pour in. Friends asking if it was real, distant cousins reacting with hearts and fire emojis. Then, a message from an unknown number. Hey, I miss us. Can we talk? I froze, my stomach knotting. I hadn't realized George still had my number. Blocked, but somehow he'd found a way around it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In that moment, I realized something vital. The spark I'd felt when leaving him hadn't been a fleeting ember. It had grown into a flame. I didn't just want freedom. I needed it. Every late-night call from a friend, every sip of tea in my grandmother's apartment, every moment of silence in the penthouse reinforced it. I was no longer the same Ava who would shrink under someone else's contempt. And yet, the threat of George lingered like a shadow. I sensed he would come back, drawn not by love, but by entitlement. I could almost hear him rehearsing his apology, imagining his charm, his hands gesturing, his eyes begging. But this Ava, this new Ava, was ready to meet him on her own terms. I began to plan. I would invest part of the inheritance, secure myself financially, and create a life that didn't revolve around someone else's approval. Each day, I felt the tight knot of anxiety in my chest loosen. I cooked meals I actually wanted, went to the gym because it felt good, not because he might notice, and started sketching out ideas for my career. And through it all, there was an undercurrent of cinematic tension, the quiet knowledge that George would see my posts, notice the penthouse, and inevitably come knocking. The city lights outside my window felt like a stage, and I was stepping into my own scene, stronger, smarter, and unafraid. I made a small vow to myself that night. I would not react. I would not chase. I would not bend for someone who abandoned me at my lowest. And if George returned, as I knew he would, I would meet him as I was now, independent, confident, and untouchable. For the first time since losing my job and him, I slept that night feeling light, almost reckless in my joy. I had survived heartbreak, betrayal, and uncertainty, and with my grandmother's legacy behind me, I was ready to thrive. But somewhere, deep in the edges of my thoughts, I couldn't shake it. Freedom was intoxicating, but the real test was coming. George wouldn't let this go quietly, and when he returned, he would bring with him everything I thought I'd left behind: temptation, guilt, and a test of just how far I'd grown. I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet. The city has a way of whispering news faster than you expect, and social media never sleeps. It started subtly. First, a comment under my sunset photo. Wow, love the new place, Ava. Looks fancy. Neutral enough, but I knew who it was from. Then, a flurry of DMs from mutual friends. Did George see your post? He's messaging everyone. And then it came, George himself. At first it was a text. Can we talk? Please. I didn't realize. I want to make this right. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear. It was irritation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was no longer the girl who clung to someone else's approval. A week later, he showed up in person. Not at my door, never that, but at a coffee shop I frequented, laptop open, headphones in. And there he was, with that practiced smile, his friends in tow like an entourage of spectators. He didn't know I saw him at first, but when our eyes met, the smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He approached, casual but deliberate. "Ava," he said, softening his voice, "we need to talk." I didn't remove my headphones. I didn't look up. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, pretending to type furiously. He leaned closer. "Look, about what I said, I didn't mean it the way it came out. You know I care about you." I finally looked up, calm, measured, cold. "You said, I don't date someone who isn't financially stable. That was your choice. I accepted it. You're late." He blinked, the smirk fading, replaced by something else. Frustration, maybe disbelief. I just want to explain myself. Can we please—" "Explain?" I cut him off, voice steady. "Explain abandoning me the moment life got hard? Explain thinking my worth is tied to a paycheck? Go ahead, I'll wait." For a moment, he looked like he might crumble, but then he tried the charm. "Ava, I was stressed. You have to understand. I didn't know how to handle it." I laughed, soft, quiet, and without warmth. "You didn't handle it. You ran. You judged. You left. And now, months later, you're trying to rewrite the story?" His friends shifted uncomfortably. He realized the audience was not on his side. He tried again, softer. I see you doing so well now. The penthouse, the job. I thought maybe we could—" I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the floorboards creak under me. "You thought maybe you could step back in once it was convenient? Once I wasn't embarrassing anymore?" The silence was sharp, almost cinematic, like the city itself was holding its breath. "I didn't mean to—" he started. "Stop," I said. "Stop right there. I don't need explanations. I don't need apologies. I don't need you. And I certainly don't need you thinking that showing up with your entourage or messages makes you relevant in my life again." He looked like he'd been hit by reality itself. I could see the anger and frustration battling with something that looked a lot like regret. I turned and left, letting him stand there in the cafe, the sound of my heels on the floor like punctuation. The days that followed were relentless. George tried every trick. Messages, DMs from friends, comments on posts, even casual run-ins accidental enough to be believable. But I remained untouchable. I didn't engage, didn't reply, didn't show him he could affect me. Instead, I built my life. I focused on work, on stability, on freedom. I invested, I planned, I thrived. And every time I saw a notification from him, or worse, a flurry of texts from mutual friends trying to mediate, I felt a quiet thrill. Not revenge exactly, just satisfaction in knowing I no longer needed him. And then came the public escalation. First, a post on Instagram. When people show you their true colors, believe them. The snake emoji, implying I had been the manipulative one. Friends sent screenshots. I laughed. Not out of malice, but because now it was obvious. George wasn't prepared for the Ava who refused to shrink. The next day, he showed up at my building, demanding entry. The doorman, Rico, handled it with calm authority. "I'm his girlfriend," George said, desperate, almost theatrical. Rico shook his head. I watched from my window as he was escorted out, the theatrics failing spectacularly. It was in that moment, watching him stumble against the walls of my life, that I felt the full weight of transformation. I had survived heartbreak. I had inherited not just money, but independence. And I realized the person who tried to control me through fear and entitlement, she, or rather he, was powerless against who I had become. It didn't take long for George to escalate. First, it was subtle. Mutual friends reporting screenshots of Instagram stories, cryptic posts that hinted I was financially manipulative. I stayed silent. Let the whispers come. Silence was more powerful than 1,000 explanations. Then it turned public. Videos, TikToks, and Instagram stories started popping up. George painted me as the villain, claiming I had hidden my inheritance to manipulate him, portraying himself as a martyr in the story of our breakup. I almost laughed out loud, not because I found it funny, but because his delusion was spectacular. Friends messaged me frantically, "Ava, are you okay?" I was, stronger than ever. I took screenshots of every post, every DM, every slanderous video. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in my mind. Courage and heart, Ava. Measure your worth by that, not the opinions of others. Then the threats began. Someone tried to add themselves as an authorized user on my credit card, George. The bank flagged it immediately, and I froze my accounts. The audacity made my blood boil, but it also reinforced one truth. I was untouchable if I stayed vigilant. That weekend, he tried a personal approach, showing up at my gym, at the farmer's market, even outside my barber's shop. Each time he performed, crying, pleading, accusing me of betrayal. People stared, some whispered, but I didn't flinch. I had learned that the world would watch, and I would not provide the drama. I simply moved through life, leaving him in the chaos he had created. By Monday, it was clear. This was no longer just a personal vendetta. He had crossed the line into harassment, defamation, and attempted identity theft. My lawyer, my cousin, thankfully, was ready. He called it the perfect storm of entitlement and delusion, and I had to admit it was strangely satisfying to finally see a plan forming. We filed for a restraining order. Every screenshot, every text, every failed attempt at financial manipulation was cataloged meticulously. Witness statements came from the doorman, the gym, the barber, and even a few bystanders who had witnessed the antics firsthand. The judge granted the temporary order immediately. But the public exposure didn't stop. George went nuclear on social media, TikToks, podcasts, Instagram Lives, all painting himself as a victim of my imagined financial schemes. He even implied I had abandoned him while he was pregnant with our hypothetical child. Yes, he claimed I had hidden a pregnancy test to manipulate him, entirely fabricated, of course. I took it all in stride. The difference now was perspective. A year ago, this would have shattered me. Now I documented everything, prepared counterclaims, and focused on the evidence that would not just protect me, but demonstrate the consequences of his actions. The day of court arrived, cinematic in its intensity. George appeared in a full designer suit, a film crew in tow, ready to perform for the gallery. I entered calmly, business casual, composed, and completely untethered from the spectacle he hoped to create. The judge shut down the cameras immediately. No theatrics in this courtroom. His lawyer tried to spin tales of emotional abuse, hidden inheritance, and financial manipulation. My lawyer countered with precise evidence: termination letters, proving I was laid off, inheritance records showing the funds came after our breakup, bank records of attempted fraud, screenshots of harassment, and even the falsified pregnancy test documentation purchased from a stock site. The judge, unimpressed, dismissed the claims. George's narrative fell apart in real time. The restraint order became permanent. Harassment claims were validated, and a countersuit for defamation, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress was approved. Outside the courthouse, his father tried to mediate, his tone more urgent than anything during the breakup. My lawyer stepped between us. I realized then, some people only respond to consequences, and today, those consequences were clear. As I walked back to my penthouse, the city around me shimmered like a reward for endurance. I had survived betrayal, public humiliation, and direct threats, and through it all I had remained untouchable, not by chance, but by choice. The city skyline glimmered through my penthouse windows, a reminder that I had rebuilt more than a home. I had rebuilt myself. Weeks of legal battles, social media chaos, and relentless harassment had culminated in clarity. My life was mine, entirely and irrevocably. The restraining order was permanent. George's attempts at manipulation, defamation, and intrusion had failed spectacularly. His podcast was removed, his social media accounts deactivated, and even his attempts to infiltrate my financial life were thwarted. He had tried every angle: entitlement, emotional manipulation, and public theatrics, and I had survived them all. But it wasn't just survival, it was triumph. The counterclaims were in process: defamation, harassment, identity theft, all validated by the mountain of evidence meticulously gathered. I had my lawyer's words echoing in my mind: consequences aren't punishment, they're lessons. He's about to learn that actions have costs. And indeed, they would. Yet, the true victory wasn't legal, it was personal. I woke up each morning in a space I owned, breathing freedom into every corner of my life. I was no longer the Ava who shrank under judgment or tried to please someone who couldn't see my value. I cooked meals that nourished me, invested my inheritance wisely, and pursued my career without distraction or compromise. One evening, I hosted a quiet dinner for myself, candlelight reflecting off the clean lines of my penthouse. No one was there to impress, no one to judge, just me. And for the first time in months, I laughed, truly laughed, at the absurdity of the chaos George had created and the strength I had discovered in surviving it. And then came the poetic irony of it all. A client for my new work, a women's financial literacy nonprofit, reached out after seeing the viral chaos online. They wanted someone who understood financial independence, resilience, and the pitfalls of entitlement in relationships. My story, once a source of torment, became the foundation of a career opportunity worth millions over the next 2 years. George's obsession had inadvertently launched me into a life I could never have imagined. Even romance found me on my terms. I met someone who valued independence and self-sufficiency, not because it looked good on Instagram, but because it was integral to our shared respect. She insisted on paying her share of dinner, and I never had to feel small or compromised again. Socially, the fallout from George's behavior left him isolated. Friends who had enabled him withdrew, his credibility shattered, and he was left to navigate the consequences of his entitlement alone. Meanwhile, I thrived, supported by a network of friends, colleagues, and mentors who had watched my transformation unfold with admiration. Reflecting back, I realized the journey had always been about more than money or betrayal. It was about discovering courage, asserting boundaries, and refusing to be diminished by someone else's insecurities or expectations. My grandmother's words echoed, "Money doesn't change people, it reveals them." She was right. George had revealed himself completely, and in doing so, had liberated me from the last chains of dependence, emotional, social, and psychological. Sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars, I whispered into the night, "I am enough. I am free. I am unstoppable." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The penthouse, the career, the independence, they were just symbols. The real inheritance was courage, and I intended to live it fully.